What's up everybody, Matt Mona here, back again with another video, and this time it's about two amazing mid-range smartphones. It's the Alcatel OneTouch Idol 3 and the Asus ZenFone 2. Now both of these devices are very affordable and attractive, especially for the price, so without wasting any further time, let's find out which one's better. First, let's start off with the design. And the Idol 3 is flat and pretty thin for a mid-range phone. The sides have chrome accents which add a nice touch, and the back of the phone has the sandpaper feel to it, giving it a better grip when you're holding the phone. The front has two stereo speakers, which is awesome and kind of rare for a mid-range device. And of course, the 5.5-inch display that has a pretty good screen to bezel ratio. The ZenFone, on the other hand, is taller, wider, and heavier, even though it has the same size screen as the Idol 3. The plastic back cover sports a brushed metal look with volume controls that resemble the ones on the LG G3. The speaker grill at the bottom is wide, traversing the entire bottom of the phone, and it looks like it can pump out some serious sound. Well, looks can be deceiving, and we'll talk about the sound a little later on. When you flip it over onto its back, the first thing you notice is the capacitive buttons on the bottom and the big bezels surrounding the display. Both phones have a micro SD card slot, but the Asus ZenFone 2 has the option of adding a second SIM. This is great for those that have two numbers and only want to carry one phone. Both devices have 13 megapixel rear-facing cameras, but on the front, the Idol 3 has 8, whereas the ZenFone 2 only has 5. So before I talk about which phone actually has the better design, I just want to mention one thing I didn't like about both of these phones, and that was the power button. So on the ZenFone 2, the power button is on the top of the device, making it extremely awkward to get to. Whereas on the Alcatel OneTouch Idol 3, the power button was on the top side, which is also not a good place to get to. So one of those little things that manufacturers have to take into consideration when designing a phone. But when it comes to the overall design, I'm definitely going to give it to the Alcatel OneTouch Idol 3. It's thinner, it's easier to hold, and it's definitely a lot lighter. Now let's move on to the display. And the Alcatel OneTouch Idol 3 has a 5.5-inch display with a resolution of 1920 by 1080, which is full HD. The screen pumps out 401 pixels per inch, which is more than enough pixels for you not to be able to see them. The display is actually really good. It's extremely bright, and in fact, I could even lower it to 25% and still be satisfied. The IPS panel is using Technicolor technology, which enhances colors and images while providing really good viewing angles. Also, with this great display comes great speakers, 2 of them to be precise. They sound really good even when the volume is at full blast. In fact, they're good enough to play in the big leagues and with some of the higher end smartphones on the market. And just like the Idol 3, the ZenFone 2 also has a 5.5-inch display with a resolution of 1920 by 1080. It does have a couple more pixels per inch, pushing it to 403, but the quality of the display is not on the same level as the Idol 3. It's not a bad display, it's just not as color accurate as other panels out on the market. The colors are a tad dull, and I always felt that the screen wasn't bright enough. Now Asus has introduced some filters to customize the display to your liking, but none of them really made the viewing experience any better. Unfortunately, the speakers don't help the situation either. Remember that long speaker grill on the back that looks like it can pump out some serious sound? Well, it's an illusion. The speaker is small and sits on the left side of the phone, and the sound is quite weak compared to the Idol 3 or any other smartphone that has good back or side-facing speakers. I think it's pretty safe to say which phone has the better display and external sound quality. It's definitely the Idol 3. The screen gets brighter, has better colors, and superior viewing angles, and those front-facing speakers are a nice touch on a mid-range device. Now the biggest difference between both of these phones lies in the software and performance. The Alcatel OneTouch Idol 3 is using the de facto standard Qualcomm Snapdragon 615 chip, which is what you'd find in most mid-range phones. Things ran pretty fluid for the most part, but I did come across the odd stutter or lag. I feel this shouldn't have happened since the Idol 3 is offering a pretty close to stock Android experience. Maybe it's Android 5.0.2 or some odd bug, but I'm sure it can be easily remedied with a future update. Because it's running close to stock Android, you won't find too many things to talk about, except for one really cool feature, which I'll get to in a second. First, the icons are completely changed, and I think it looks great. You also have a couple of gestures like turn the phone over to mute and double tap to wake up. But the coolest thing is that the phone software was designed to allow you to use the phone in any orientation. So basically what this means is you can use the phone upside down. Even if you receive a call, it doesn't matter which way you pick it up because both ends have a microphone, which I think is pretty cool. The Asus ZenFone 2 is using an Intel processor, not as common but pretty good. The model I have here is the cheapest one, so it's using the Atom Z3560 1.8 GHz quad-core chip and has a PowerVR G6430 GPU, which is the same GPU inside of the iPhone 5S. Basically, this means that this phone is no slouch, and the overall experience was fluid, with no slowdowns, lag, or stutter while transitioning through menus and playing games. Unlike the Idol 3, the ZenFone is running the earliest version of Android Lollipop 5.0, which means the fluidity and battery life could be even better than it already is with a future update. On top of Lollipop is Asus's own Zen UI, which I personally don't like. It's bubbly and cartoony, and it's one of those skins that you either love or hate. Speaking of hate, I can't stand the amount of bloatware on this phone. Asus seems to have adopted their PC policy of shoving as much useless junk on a device as possible. I was greeted by a virus scanner, memory cleaner, and a bunch of other useless apps that I would never install. Thankfully, you can uninstall some of them. Now, if gestures are important to you, then you'll find a lot more with the ZenFone. For example, draw a W on the screen and it will launch the browser, and a V will bring you into the phone app. There's a bunch to choose from, and the option of customizing your own is also available. So for software and performance, both of these phones have their pros and cons. The Idol 3, for example, has much better software, offering you a clean, stock Android UI, but it does produce the odd stutter or lag when using the phone. Whereas the ZenFone 2 gives you a much more fluid experience while giving you a poorer software experience by having all that bloat and a very bubbly and cartoony UI. So what is it? Do you prefer better performance or better software? Both phones have big batteries. The ZenFone 2 with 3000 mAh and the Idol 3 with 2910. Needless to say, the size difference is insignificant because the battery life on both of these phones is superb. Using your phone for a day and a half is not uncommon, and quite frankly, it's amazing that these mid-range devices offer better battery life than most of the recently announced flagship phones. Now, there are some differences though in the way they charge. The ZenFone 2 has Intel's fast charging, and the OneTouch doesn't support any form of quick charging whatsoever. If topping up quickly during the day is your thing, then the ZenFone is the better option. Also, unfortunately, neither device supports wireless charging. They both have 16 GB of internal storage space, but the ZenFone can also be bought with 32 or 64. If you decide to buy the models with a higher capacity, it will also come with 4 GB of RAM and a faster Intel processor. 16 GB of internal storage is quite low, and thankfully both phones come with a micro SD card slot. Now the Idol 3 supports up to 128 GB, whereas the ZenFone 2 only goes up to 64. Finally, the camera, and both phones have a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera, the ZenFone 2 using a Toshiba sensor, and the Idol 3 a Sony IMX214. So which phone takes the better picture? And you'll quickly come to realize it's the ZenFone 2. The colors are more vivid, the images are sharper, even though the ZenFone tends to over-sharpen them. Overall exposure is superior, and when you turn on super resolution mode, the pictures look even better, assuming you don't mind waiting a little longer to snap a photo. And snapping photos in low light don't get much better for the Idol 3. The ZenFone 2 simply does a better job. It seems the Idol 3 struggles to focus on a subject in low light and also shows a lot of digital noise. The difference on quality when it comes to the front-facing camera is not as bad. The slight edge does go towards the ZenFone 2 as it is able to capture more detail. Now it's obvious the camera on the ZenFone 2 is a little bit better, and you're not going to get a bad camera experience on either device, especially for a mid-range phone. But if you do value a camera over everything else on a device, then you're probably going to lean towards the ZenFone 2. So the big question, which phone is the better phone? Well, the OneTouch Idol 3 has the better design, better display, good external sound, and offers a better software experience. Whereas the ZenFone 2 has faster performance and provides a better camera experience. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to price. The ZenFone 2 can be bought for 250 Canadian or 200 US unlocked at a store, whereas the Alcatel OneTouch Idol 3 costs 250 US or $350 Canadian. Now, if you do buy it here in Canada, you are going to be locked to a carrier, and you can only use it with that carrier, unless of course you get your phone unlocked. So I think it's pretty safe to say that here in Canada, the ZenFone 2 is the better buy, but if you're in the States, the OneTouch Idol 3 might be the better option. So what do you guys think of both of these phones? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you smash that like button, and I want to thank everybody for watching this video. If you want to see more great news, make sure to visit www.mobilesyrup.com, and I'll see everybody in the next episode. Which phone has the better design? I just want to mention one thing I didn't like about both of these phones, and that's the power button. On the ZenFone 2, the power button, wow, I'm holding the LG G4. This is not the ZenFone 2.